Hello, welcome. I saw a number of hands up. I'm going to ask you the same question at the end of my talk. How many of you really created or were involved in MVP development? Hello, I work with various companies, not necessarily IT companies, and my job is a bit weird. The job is about helping them become agile in their product development. So most likely, customers that I meet are bad in agility. If they were good, they were not my customers, right? However, even if I approach very good customers, already running Scrum, Kanban, other types of product development, there is something really interesting about them. All of them somehow don't get the concept of the MVP. All my talks usually are motivated with my frustration. This is what I heard a few months ago from one of the customers. We've been developing this proof of concept of our second MVP for last 4 sprints, and actually, we still need 2 more. We've got a bunch of topics over here. Apparently, teams are using Scrum. I hear sprints over here. There's a proof of concept. We have second MVP, and we're developing it forever. That's very curious. So I thought, let's discuss about what MVP is, what MVP is not. I'm going to give you a few of examples and try to combine it with other methods that we have in product development. So, I just realized that the clock is not running. You don't want me to speak for 3 hours, I can do that. Anybody watches the Games of Thrones, maybe? I thought so. How good are you, how happy you are about the last episode, about the last season? I see a lot of hands. Okay, this way. This picture that you can see over here is not about the Games of Thrones, however, could work. It really could work for that. Quite often I hear angry managers very close to deadline, 1 week, maybe 2 weeks before the deadline over projects saying, hey, we are running out of time. You did nothing, and we really need to finish it. Let's cut the scope out and focus on the MVP only. So in a popular language, common language, MVP apparently is something that is minimum, must have. We will die if we're not gonna deliver it at all. We had a scope, now it's narrowed down to the MVP. This is not the concept that I would like to talk about. Actually, MVP stands for minimum viable product. It's a very weird term because minimum is very ambiguous word, honestly. You will see in a moment that minimum might be really minimum or really quite big minimum. Viable is, we don't know actually what viable means. Is it usable or just testable, marketable or not? And the product, tricky thing, you'll see very fast that MVP not necessarily is a product. We don't need a product to have an MVP. There are various proper definitions of the MVP. The one that I like the most comes from Jeff Gotthold, the co-author of Lean UX, Lean User Experience book. He says, MVP is the smallest thing you can build to test a hypothesis. That means we have an hypothesis. We have an assumption we would like to verify. Assumption about what? Well, the problem is about whatever. In a moment on a chart, you have seen various levels of things that can work our products out. Business model, customer experience, our process. We can have a lot of hypotheses around all of them, technically speaking. So MVP is the smallest thing we are focusing on in order to test a hypothesis. That means we need to have not only an assumption, but some effort put into product development to verify this assumption. If we just assume, yeah, they will like it, they're gonna buy it, then it's not a hypothesis, it's a risk that we are taking because we make this assumption. Another definition developed around Scrum.org recently. Scrum.org launched a new training where they try to combine Lean UX with Scrum directly. It's a minimum amount of work to gain validated learning. You see, it's not a product. It's not necessarily what we build. It's amount of work. It's an effort that we need to spend to gain validated learning. About validated learning, again, we could talk for a couple of days. Validated means, more or less, that we have a proof. We have a proof that in that market we like it, customer we like it, users are happy, whatever our hypothesis is. Lean startuppers, Lean startup practitioners tend to say, we don't want to ask users, do you like this product, or would you like us to implement this new functionality? Why? Because they lie. They always say, yeah, sure, implement it. When we implement it, and at the end of the day, nobody uses it. Instead of that, in Lean startup, we create experiments, and we experiment on people. All right, why do we care about minimum viable product? Perhaps you recognize, maybe somebody's from Radom. It's a brand new airport they've just built a couple of months ago. What is so peculiar about this airport? There are completely no planes there, and the rude people says even no birds. Even no birds. Somebody spent a lot of money creating let's say a product, a bunch of services over here. Nobody wants to use it. That's an extreme investment, extreme case on an investment. By the way, not Polish specific. About a decade earlier, a couple of airports in Spain were built in a similar way. A few years ago, Chinese company bought an airport for 10,000 euros. I'd love to buy an airport for 10,000 euros because nobody literally wanted to do anything there. So we care about MVPs, minimum viable product, to verify our assumptions, verify our hypothesis. There is no MVP with no hypothesis. That's the point. We want to avoid extreme cost, long-term investment, any kind of long projects. That's a risk. That's a risk in a very fast-changing world. That's important. Now, minimum viable product. I like to focus on the word minimum. A few years ago, around 2012, G.V. Constable created or plotted a chart called the truth curve. He says that depending on the state of your product development, product maturity, where are you in the product development cycle, the investment you need to take to learn something new about your product is different. Let me give you a couple of edge cases. So if we start over here, we have no product at all. Well, I can build full, well-performing, fully functional product and ship it to users, but it's a huge investment. If I build it and users don't care, I lost a lot. So if my product is no more, not yet at the market, absolutely, what I would start low, maybe ask them, maybe create a prototype, something smaller, and based on that, I will learn, do they like it or not. The more we go to the right, the more effort, the more money, in other words, we spend on our experiments. The confidence level of the learning is obviously higher. Now, there's an extension of that slide. I don't like it because Jeff over here written down just an examples of things that you do. At one of training sessions, somebody not necessarily paying attention ever thought that this is the order in which you should create your or validate your hypothesis. No, those are just examples, just to give us in general the view what is it about. So, if you are not verifying your hypothesis, you are in the world of fantasy. Maybe or maybe not, there is a business opportunity somewhere there. You really don't know. I know a couple of CEOs, CIOs, CTOs of companies that actually claim, for sure people will love it. No, it's fantasy. more or less relevant, but still fantasy. The moment we start to verify our assumptions, verify our hypotheses, we can talk about learning. Basic learning over here, interview. In the design thing, he would say we're creating ethnography, interviewing and observing people all together. Based on that, we can find out their behaviors, what they like, what they don't like. We can create some personas and build another assumptions. Maybe paper testing, maybe landing page, maybe prototype, pre-selling, and so on and so on. The more we go to the right, the learning gets more and more expensive on the one side. On the other, we are more and more confident about what we learned. So, where over here is MVP? It depends, thank you. I'm also a consultant, obviously. It depends on what? Well, it depends on your product and current hypothesis. Your MVP might be everywhere, therefore when I say minimum viable product, it's minimum for a given situation. It's very context specific. If you have no clue, greenfield situation, minimum might be over here. If it's a running product, already running, and you're trying to just add on top of the running functionalities something new, perhaps you need some more. It also depends on how confident you would like to be about the learning. So minimum in minimum viable product is very context specific. All right. Just a few examples of MVPs. I was honestly struggling for hours. Should I put some examples over here or not necessarily? There are plenty of them in the internet, and I don't want to go into that long discussion. But Dropbox, the very first MVP of Dropbox was not P. It was minimum, definitely viable, but not a product at all. What they did was actually a video. They created a video of how Dropbox will look like. And based on that, they ask people, well, are you interested or not? If you are interested, leave us email. We're gonna be in touch. So we have an MVP. We're testing our hypothesis that people will care, that people would like to store their files not on their hardware, but somewhere in what we nowadays call the cloud. It's a hypothesis. We are verifying it without building it because this is quite time consuming. And there are many, many other examples in the world. Try to Google it. That's not the point of my my talk at the moment. The Kickstarter, another example, that just the second one that I brought over here. The Kickstarter, for you who are not familiar with that, is a website where whenever you are in a startup situation, you want to build a product, but you have no money, you can put it over here, advertise it, and people are giving you money. It's a crowdfunding style of initiatives. Each product that you put on this website, each product put on the website is actually an MVP. If people, the crowd, will give me money, I can assume that my hypothesis, value hypothesis, how we would call it in a lean startup, it's verified. People do care. If I cannot collect any money, maybe let's pivot. Maybe let's do something. Let's do something else. All right. So minimum viable product is not necessarily a product, tangible product. A minimum depends on the context. Let's move forward because that's not the end. Hanikra Burke, I like this definition. A few years ago, he wrote down a very, very long blog post around MVP concept and how misunderstood he was in his previous works. And he said, for him, MVP is not minimum viable product, but earliest feedbackable product. That makes more sense. It's something smallest that gives us the earliest possible answer or feedback about the hypotheses that we made. I like this one. I like this one as well. All right. Now I really wonder if you get a clue what those gentlemen in the corner are doing. Took this picture literally 2 weeks ago. Of course, they're validating, they're verifying a hypothesis, but technically speaking, they're driving a car. They are driving a car. Over here, you can see our customer, our user. That's the car, obviously, you can see. This is the device that we produce. Everybody's saying this, of course, but this is a tablet, this is iPad, and we are using voice commands. By the way, that's how this tablet looks like. What we are doing here, we are having an experiment, very cheap one, using a paper prototype. Somebody said, well, instead of creating a very fully functional application on iPad, let's draw it, let's simulate it over here. And based on that, we're gonna learn. Those two gentlemen over here were kids, apparently, also from the team that creates this application, because the hypothesis that they have was you can use voice command for navigation if you have kids in the back. By the way, no, you can't. We proved it with several tryouts over here. So this is a prototype, a paper prototype, very simple one, put into the context of the target product. But on the other side, those are also prototypes. They were prototypes. Falcon Heavy rockets from a SpaceX company of Elon Musk. Those are prototypes trying to land together over here. So what is the prototype? Something really, really small or something actually fully functional? The only difference between those prototypes landing over here and a real product was, I guess, no luggage inside. They were just to go up and down, because hypothesis that we wanted to validate is the latest release of the engine and a stabilization mechanism over here. Well, the point is both are prototypes, but on different level of fidelity. This is very low fidelity prototype, not a lot of interaction with the user, and this is very high fidelity prototype, actually a product nearly perfectly functioning. Definition of a prototype are many of them. For me, it's a version, preliminary version of a product or a service, actually. Why not all service? Allowing real world experience. In both cases, the experience was real, even if this car, especially in this paper prototype, even if this car was not a car really. There was a very, very precisely defined hypothesis. I'm having kids, and there will be somebody trespassing in the front will be hit because I'm talking navigation or not, and yet we collect a lot of feedback. The prototype is a version of a product that gives us possibility to have this real world experience. Now the question is MVP a prototype? Or a prototype on MVP? We're gonna see in a moment. Before that, I have another topic to cover. It all started with the very first sentence at the beginning. We are here finishing the 4th sprint of our proof of concept development for the second MVP of our product. This is a simplified overview of the Scrum framework, and a few years ago, Ginter Verheyen, who used to be those days the head of the Scrum series in Scrum.org, he said, if I were to remove everything from the Scrum framework but leave one tiny topic, the one tiny thing that I would leave would be obviously the increment. That's why we are doing Scrum. That's what we care about, the increment. However, very often I notice that many people in various companies don't get the concept of the increment. Maybe because of this picture or pictures that look similar to that. Very often I see or I hear we have a sprint, and at the end of the sprint we get an increment. Then we have another sprint, and at the output of the sprint there's another increment. And we have a sprint of the increment. Every sprint we have an increment, which is partially correct. We have the increment at the end of every sprint, but it's not a different increment. Increment is what we did, what is completed during a sprint, plus the sum of all the value of other increments from previous sprints. Scrum is not iterative process only. It's, many people forget about it, iterative and incremental. Meaning whatever I built in the first sprint incrementally grows to whatever is the outcome of the second, third, and so on. The product is going incrementally. That's the definition directly taken from the Scrum Guide, but also my experience is that not everybody reads the Scrum Guide. tough book to read indeed. All right, so let's try to combine MVP and increment. This is my picture, and I'm actually not proud of that because those circles are of exactly same size they shouldn't be. I mean, the increment is a concept coming directly from Scrum, and we have a couple of feature characteristics of the increment. First of all, increment meets definition of done. We have definition of done, it's done. Done is like pregnant, you are either done or you're not done. You cannot be 99% done, you cannot be 50% done. You are done or not. If it's done, it's the increment. That's what we hear from Scrum Master, that's what we hear from Agile coaches. Increment is a potentially releasable or shippable product. So it's in a state that we can release it to real users, to real market, to real customers. Not necessarily we have to. The increment should be usable, not has to be useful. What's the difference? Well, usable means I can get feedback from customers, I can release it, they can do something with it. It is not necessarily useful, fully useful product. The very good example that I bring up quite often during training sessions is e-commerce system. Usually e-commerce has, I don't know, the search functionalities, shopping cart, and eventually payment with credit card, PayPal, PayU, whatever technique is. And let's imagine that during the first sprint we have implemented the search and shopping cart. I can click, select this is my product, this is the product, I can put it into the shopping cart. There is no payment yet. It's okay, it's the first sprint. We did a lot for the first sprint. Payments will be implemented later. Can I release it without payments? Of course I can. Would I? Not necessary. That's why we say the increment is potentially releasable. The product owner is the one who makes decision about it. In some cases, I can't see the value, like in that case, because I can show it to stakeholders during the sprint review. I wouldn't put it live on the website. There's no sense. I would go live when I have also the payment options added. However, if you go into a couple of the websites with of startup products, you would see that it's not always the case. It's quite funny, frustrating on the one side. On the other side, I understand it fully. Recently, there was a company, can't remember the name, producing the razors for men. And their philosophy is a razor as a service, shaving as a service. So instead of me trying to buy it online, I'm buying it online, and they know when, in a week or two, I run out of the razors, and they automatically are sending me another package. I don't have to remember about it. That's awesome. At least that's what they thought. I think because they wanted to have minimum viable product embedded, they have the search option, very easy one or two packages, nothing very peculiar. They have the shopping cart, completely no payments. I mean, no integrated payments. When you went to the last step, there was a bank account written down and the kind information now send us money using traditional bank transfer. When we get it, we're gonna ship it. That's also an MVP because they don't want to spend a lot of money. All right, excuse me. Possibly. I know there are many more of them. I don't want to advertise any, especially that I'm not a customer of those anymore. I was just curious. All right, questions. Does MVP have to be a product at all? I think we already answered the question. No, not necessary. MVP is whatever effort you take in order to verify your hypothesis. Especially, it would be good if you have one hypothesis, not many, one MVP for one. There is no direct relation, I will come back over to here, there's no direct relation between the increment and MVP. They're coming from two different words. Increment, as I said, Scrum. MVP, it's related to the Lean startup movement and other movements coming out of the Lean startup, Lean UX, Lean Analytics, for example. So there's no direct relation between the increment and the MVP. Of course, if you talk to Scrum people, they'll say, well, each sprint is a sort of experiment because we have really no clue will we make it or not at the end of the day. And when we make it, we have really no clue will people like it or not. We're gonna know it when the increment is released. MVP is more a concept of verifying the hypothesis. It's minimum effort again to test it. So MVP not necessarily is a product. Secondly, how many MVPs can a single product have? Well, as many as the number of hypotheses that you have. Lean startup may suggest, the name may suggest that it's for startups only. Eric Ries, author of the method, said few months later that no, it's not only for startups, it's for any product development or business development initiatives and opportunities. The M, how minimum the MVP would be different. We can have many MVPs for a product. One MVP in terms of effort may take half a sprint, 1 day. Another MVP may take a couple of sprints if we really need to develop a lot. We can have no sprints if we are not using Scrum. We can have MVP with no sprints. The biggest difference between Lean Startup feedback loop and Scrum feedback loop is sprints are a rhythm. They consist of the same time. We start one, finish one, next one starts immediately. Duration is always the same unless we change it. With MVP or feedback loop in Lean Startup, that's not the case. Could a prototype be an MVP? Absolutely yes. A prototype in modern movements is related, I'd say, to design thinking and this kind of approaches. However, the word prototype existed for years in any other methods. Is whatever that gives you real-world experience. It might be of low fidelity, high fidelity. However, each of them might be an MVP. It doesn't have to be an MVP. It depends on what are you verifying consciously as a product owner or business owner. Can I spend 6 months creating an MVP? Yes, no? I would say, yeah, technically, but what for? If it's a rocket, I'm not sure if they were building the very first rocket for 6 months or not. Rocket sounds to me like a bigger product. I always bring here up the company coming from Switzerland that produces pacemakers. If you get a heart attack or whatever, pacemakers understands the rhythm is not the correct one and gives you electrical shock. They developed it in Scrum, in sprints. And of course, after the first sprint of a month, 1 month long sprint, it was not a fully functional product, but was tested, not maybe on people, but even on some dummy meat, and it provided real functionalities. I can imagine after the first sprint, it just senses the rhythm. After the next one, it senses the rhythm and makes a decision if it's a correct one or not correct one. After another 1 or 2 sprints, it reacts if the rhythm is not appropriate, and so on and so on. So MVP might be something really small. My hypothesis should not be big. Can we build a pacemaker in 6 months, or can we build a pacemaker period? It might be, okay, can this particular sensor work for us? And that's small MVP. When we have it, we start another and another. 6 months is a lot. Nobody will give you a number if it's a day or weeks. It comes from the business that you work with. Honestly, the more digital business is, the faster MVP or feedback loops, any other feedback loops should be. How many sprints to create an MVP? Again, there's no correlation over here. Might be 1 sprint, might be 2 sprints, half a sprint, 1 day, no sprints at all. There's no direct relation. All right. Checklist for MVPs. If you write it down into Google, you would see plenty of them. 10 steps, 5 steps, 7 steps, 3 steps, what to do. For me, an MVP, to understand it correctly, not as something of the minimal scope that our manager wanted, consists of 3 topics only. The first one, we need to have a hypothesis, a clear hypothesis about our new functionality, the entire product, the customer, the persona customer segment, whatever hypothesis is, we need to have a defined minimal effort to test it. The effort not necessary is a product. And finally, we need to know when MVP, in other words, when MVP verifies hypothesis, when the MVP says, no, our hypothesis was not correct, so some test criteria for that. When you have those three, you will avoid discussions about MVPs understood as minimum scope to satisfy our customer before the deadline. So I have a question to you. Hands up, how many of you worked with an MVP? Not bad. Lucky you. Good luck with the future ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paweł. Let's give just 1 minute for everyone who is switching rooms, so it's like less chaotic.